Simmer's interview, take 69.
My name is Freyja Appleyard-Keeling. I'm a final year student at the University of Leeds.
So what are your influences as an artist?
My influences mainly revolve around notions of the individual and their internal landscape. It's based around the concept of the internal spaces made external, focusing on rituals, the inheritance of matriarchal knowledges, and essentially what makes the things that are considered witches in historic times and feminists in the current context.
Simmer interview, take 404.
How have you explored these themes through artwork in the past?
For the past 2 years, my work has mainly been 3D structures. It began focusing specifically on this idea of making the internal landscape external with a very heavily designed space. And then last year, my second year, this work grew to be a bit more involved in the ritual side of things and following personal connection. While creating a 3D structure, I also explored family rituals, and these became present within the practice and within the space. So I baked honey cakes, and I researched different ways that my family had followed rituals and traditions throughout their lives.
So what have you taken from that into your current work?
Well, from that, my work has kind of evolved into more of a specific focus on the individual. And rather than making these general structures and spaces, the work has become more specifically focused on portraits. My initial plan had been to create a huge, large-scale series of portraits of feminists and witches, because in case it hadn't become obvious earlier, witches is a very personal connection. I essentially come from a family of witches. These portraits, they were going to be heavily designed, very curated, involving the ideas of creating these structures, but within the person's own landscape. So all the artefacts and items that are important and relevant to them. However, that wasn't really possible. It was a very large-scale idea. It's still something I want to do. But within the current climate and with the degree's time constraints, it's not currently possible. And so my ideas turned more towards portraits of my family. This was initially a plan for a triptych for my mother, grandmother, and my little sister, essentially echoing the maiden, mother, and crone of the pagan religions, specifically Celtic. However, I couldn't really do the portrait of my grandmother because of the current pandemic that is going on. And so the focus for her portrait has instead shifted, and everyone has kind of moved a stage on. So my mother is now in the position of the pre-crone, I will be taking the position of the pre-mother, and my younger sister is still the pre-maiden. The portraits themselves involve this curated environment. The sitters have chosen objects of personal significance, and even down to the wardrobes. And so I have been hand-making dresses to test out. So these spaces are very heavily curated. Portraits involve the sitters choosing the area they want to be photographed in, the clothes they would like to wear, including custom handmade gowns. Then all their personal artefacts are placed within a visible area to echo the symbolic portraiture, which was a traditionally male portrait where all the objects were used in order to represent their power, their importance, and their intelligence, or rather, stolen knowledge. So within my portraits, there are various objects which have personal meaning to the sitter but won't be inherently obvious to the audience. I'm not going to provide a codex, as that would detract from the individual significance of the objects. However, they will be able to be explored if the viewer so desires. The portraits currently are in a state of half-finishedness, with some of them only just been sketched. The plan is, of course, to finish these portraits, although methods of display have had to change.
Simmer interview, take 420.
Where have you been creating this work?
Due to the restrictions on studio space, the university building now being closed, my area has now condensed quite a lot. I essentially have around 1/8 of the bedroom that I share with my younger sister. So the portraits and the costume making each take place in about half of this space. The painting is set up on my usual easel, but it's much more cramped. And all sewing has to take place on the floor.
Compared to your prior 3D works, is there any limitations in working with portraiture and more traditional methods of art?
I'd say there are limitations to both of the areas that I've worked within. Within 3D works, it often became as though it was a set rather than an interactive piece, which was the intention. And again, with portraits, there isn't as much interaction. You can't pick up the objects, examine them, and see if there are any clues or hints about them. However, with the 3D spaces, I felt that there was often still that barrier. People wouldn't want to take one of the cakes to eat them or mess with the piles of bones, understandably. But with portraits, there's a more defined presentation. It's how I want it to be presented, it's in the exact angle, positioning, and therefore the portrait represents a more specific focus of the work. With the 3D space, there's a lot of issues with how someone's going to see it, if they're going to see it from the wrong angle, how the exhibition area is going to limit interaction. And so with the portraits, it's a more direct, focused approach to creating these structured spaces, which is still evident and obvious and a very important aspect of my work.
If people are interested in your art and wish to commission a piece or just look at more of your art in general, where can they find your art and you?
So if people were interested in finding out more about my art, then I have an Instagram account, which is at Freyja AK, Freyja with a J. And I also have a YouTube channel, which is in the early stages.
Okay. Thank you and good night.
Thanks, Oliver. Thanks, Oscar. Thank you, Astrid.